strokes, the unlikely gestures, the strong finishes, and the graceful exits.
Join me for all the best sporting moments.
Time by Maurice Lacroix.
This Monday on Primetime Asia, the much-awaited verdict for Gu Kailai, the wife of Chinese politician Bo Xilai, a suspended death sentence. 4 Chinese police officers also convicted today for the same murder. Also this Monday, Japan dismisses Chinese protests over Japanese activists taking a trip to disputed islands over the weekend, but Tokyo stressing the feud over the islands in the East China Sea should not damage ties between the neighbors. The Asian Development Bank projects a growth of 78% for the next 10 years. This even as the country took another step towards democratic reform by lifting censorship for local publications. Also, criminalizing sham marriages in Singapore. Can it be done without persecuting real couples? Good Monday evening, everyone. I'm Timothy Go on Primetime Asia. Glenda Chong is away for the evening. Well, a court in China handed Gu Kailai, the wife of disgraced Chinese politician Bo Xilai, a suspended death sentence for murdering a British man. The case has shaken the ruling Communist Party ahead of its leadership transition later this year. The court in Hefei found Gu guilty of murdering businessman Neil Haywood and gave her the death penalty with 2 years reprieve. The sentence means she is likely to face life in jail. The court also sentenced Zhang Jiaojun, an aide to Bo's household, of 9 years in jail for acting as an accomplice.
司法鉴定意见表明，博古开来有完全刑事责任能力，但患有精神障碍，对本次作案行为的性质和后果的辨认能力完整，控制能力削弱。博古开来在归案后向有关部门提供他人违纪违法线索，为有关案件的查处起到了积极作用。博古开来当庭认罪悔罪，故对博古开来判处死刑，可不立即执行。
我感到这个判决是公正的，它全面体现了我们法庭对于法律的特别尊重，对于现实的特别尊重，特别是对于生命的特别尊重。
Well, during her trial earlier this month, Gu admitted to killing Mr. Haywood last November by pouring poison down his throat. She alleged that a business dispute between them led him to threaten her son. 4 Chinese police officers have been convicted for trying to cover up Mr. Haywood's murder. They were handed jail sentences of between 5 and 11 years. For more on this now, Channel News Asia's Valerie Tan is live with us in Beijing tonight. Valerie, with Gu Kailai going to jail now, what's going to happen to her wealth and business? And could her son be taking over some of it?
Well, Tim, it's not clear at this moment, but Gu does have 4 sisters, 2 of which are said to be based in Hong Kong. But together, the 4 of them are said to own and run businesses from China to the Caribbean worth hundreds of millions of dollars. One of Gu's sisters is reportedly said to be worth $79 million. And Gu herself reportedly owns a law consultancy with several offices here in China. In any case, the Chinese government can choose to freeze whatever assets Gu has in China, but that has not been announced at this moment. The court so far has not made any mention of charging Gu with siphoning hundreds of millions of dollars overseas, which was earlier alleged by the former police chief of Chongqing, Wang Lijun, and said to be part of the dealings Gu had with Neil Haywood.
All right, Val, of course, everyone wants to know what's going to happen to Gu Kailai's husband, Bo Xilai. He hasn't been seen since April.
Well, the spotlight has never really left Gu's husband, Bo Xilai. He has not been formally charged with murder, but is under investigations by the Communist Party. What's going to happen to him is anyone's guess at this moment, but it will be no surprise if Bo is to be charged and convicted for abetting the murder of Neil Haywood, since he's the husband of Gu Kailai and the party secretary of Chongqing then when the murder happened. Tim?
All right, Valerie, thank you very much for that. Valerie Tan there in Beijing. Our London correspondent Ollie Barrett tells us how British officials have responded to the sentencing.
They say, first of all, that their thoughts are with Mr. Haywood's family at this time. They continue by saying that they welcomed the investigation into Neil Haywood's death, which, of course, at first was dismissed as a heart attack, and they also welcomed the fact that those found to be responsible were put on trial, and that has led to a conclusion. They also say that they made it consistently clear to the Chinese authorities that they wanted international human rights standards to be upheld, and that they did not want to see the death penalty applied in this case. All the way through this, the Foreign Office has been seeking to make that position clear, which is always its position in cases around the world. It does not approve of the death penalty, while trying not to be seen too much to be interfering in domestic Chinese affairs. So clearly British authorities welcoming the end of this process and the fact that there has been no death penalty applied. As for Mr. Haywood's family, we've heard from a lawyer that they respect the court's decision, but we're not hearing much more than that.
Well, we will have a closer look on this case a little bit later on here on Primetime Asia. Now let's have a look at what else is making news this Monday night. The United Nations officially ending its troubled observer mission to Syria. The 300-member team was deployed to monitor a ceasefire between rebels and the government, agreed as part of former UN envoy Kofi Annan's 6-point peace plan. But the truce never took hold as both sides violated a ceasefire. The United Nations decided to end the mission due to escalating violence. Mr. Annan's successor, Lakhdar Brahimi, says his task is no longer about preventing civil war in Syria, but rather ending it. He adds that he urgently needs to clarify what support the United Nations can give him. Philippine rescuers are stepping up the search for the country's Interior Secretary, Jesse Robredo, who is feared dead after the light plane he was in crashed into the sea 2 days ago. President Benigno Aquino flown to Masbate Island to lead the search for his close aide and friend. The two pilots are also missing. Military helicopters have expanded the areas they were surveying, while special divers are working to locate the missing plane. A U.S. military aircraft has also joined the search after metal was detected on the seabed. Japan is interviewing 10 nationalists who landed on a disputed island at the heart of a territorial row sparking protests in China. Police are apparently investigating if the landing was lawful. The islands were known as Senkaku in Japan and Diaoyu in China. Japanese media said the 10 would be charged with a minor offense for landing on the island without proper government permission. Well, yesterday, nationalists swam ashore and waved Japanese flags, a move that enraged China, which, like Japan, claims the island as its own. The uninhabited island, surrounded by rich fishing grounds and potential underground gas reserves, have been claimed by Japan, China, and even Taiwan. The landing has sparked nationalist outrage on both sides, fueling fears of escalating tensions.
この政府がやらないからこそ私たちがやったのであり、誰からがやらなければいけなかった行為だと思っております。
China has protested the incident, but Japan has rejected China's demands. The Japanese government's top spokesman insists the island chain is its sovereign territory and Japan effectively controls them. But Tokyo also stressed the feud over the islands in the East China Sea should not damage ties between neighbors. Well, our Japan Bureau Chief Michio Ishida is standing by, and also back with us, our China correspondent Valerie Tan in Beijing. All right, let's start with you, Michio. We hear that the Tokyo metropolitan government has applied to land on the disputed island. What's the latest on that?
Well, Chief Cabinet Secretary Osamu Fujimura unveiled today Tokyo metropolitan government submitted an application to land on Senkaku. Tokyo Governor Shintaro Ishihara announced in April in Washington that Tokyo will buy 3 islets of Senkaku, and he said he was talking to the so-called owner, and the owner was positive of selling the islands to Mr. Ishihara. But before taking action, Tokyo wants to study the islands, so applied to gain permission from the Japanese central government. You see, the Senkakus are owned by a family, and the government pays rent to that family to protect the island. But the application was not accepted because it was incomplete, lacking details, and after its completion, the central government will decide whether or not to give the green light. And however, there's been mounting donation to the Tokyo metropolitan government from the public for the purchase of the island, and it's an indication that many here in Japan support the idea. Tim.
Now, if tensions do escalate, Michio, what is Japan likely to do?
Well, Prime Minister Yoshihiko Noda did mention the possibility of dispatching the self-defense force. Also, Japan's policy is to strengthen defense in the Southern Sea. Now, I spoke to President of the Research Institute of Peace and Security, Professor Masashi Nishihara, said he believes there's a need to utilize the self-defense force to protect the islands. But he said the stance Japan takes on the Senkaku is different from that of Takeshima or Dokdo, which is also claimed by South Korea. That's because Senkaku is already under Japan control, while Takeshima is under South Korea's control, with South Korea having its military presence there and putting residents on the island. So regarding Takeshima, a self-defense force is unlikely to be utilized. Tim.
All right, Michio, thanks for that. Let's move over now to Val. Val, we've heard about the possible scenario for Japan, but China, what might Beijing do if tensions escalate?
Well, Tim, I spoke to a few analysts and they say despite the angry exchange and the rising tension, Beijing is very likely to turn to diplomacy to settle the dispute. We saw that in the month-long standoff China had with the Philippines back in April. Beijing will want to negotiate a bilateral agreement with Tokyo that allows, 1, its fishermen to continue to fish in those waters, 2, China and Japan to perform joint exploration of the rich natural resources said to be in those waters, and 3, conduct naval exercises. And China will want to negotiate this bilaterally with Japan rather than have it settled unilaterally, as it would give Beijing more leverage in terms of bargaining power. But using diplomacy and bilateral negotiation, according to the analysts I spoke to, is widely regarded as just a temporary solution to the dispute. Many say taking the matter to the International Maritime Court of Justice would be the best way out, but it's a solution neither side seems willing to pursue for now.
All right, Val, thank you very much for that. Valerie Tan there in Beijing, and Michio Ishida talking to us about the dispute in the East China Sea. Now, for more on the territorial spat, I'm joined here in the studio by Dr. Lee Ming-jiang. He is an associate professor with the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Thanks for joining us tonight, Dr. Lee. So, will this dispute seriously damage or put more damage in Sino-Japanese relations?
Well, definitely, there will be damage on bilateral relationship for some time to come in the near future. Both countries will be angry at each other. You're going to see probably some rise of nationalist sentiments in either country.
Okay, what about long-term damage or long-term solutions, rather, to this dispute? What would you suggest both parties do?
Well, the whole incident is going to really provide a opportunity for foreign policy makers and security decision makers in China and Japan to rethink, what new strategy they need to come up with to deal with similar situations. So in that regard, I think it's very likely it's a precedent that will catalyze further similar incidents in the future.
Okay, Tokyo is calling the unauthorized landing of Japanese activists as, in its words, regrettable. Do you think this will satisfy China?
It's certainly a show of goodwill on part of Japan, but I doubt that people in China will interpret that way. I mean, people in China are simply angry at the fact that the Japanese officials and lawmakers actually made the landing to the Senkaku Diaoyu Island. So they will actually focus on this fact instead of anything that Japanese government officials may say or any expression, any wording that they will use.
Okay, you mentioned about nationalistic rhetoric, and there's also growing anti-Japanese sentiment in China right now. What do you think Beijing can do to balance this or maintain economic ties with Japan with all this going on?
Well, I think the overall bilateral relationship, the political relationship, and economic relationship will be very important in the consideration of Chinese decision makers. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the decision makers in China have to really balance. I mean, there are probably three things that they can do. One, China will continue to maintain a strong position on the sovereignty claim. China will do all sorts of things. Most of them will be symbolic to demonstrate its sovereignty in opposition to the actual Japanese occupation of the islands. And second, I think China will be tougher in terms of implementing its law enforcement activities. And third, if any incident involving Chinese fishermen or Chinese national who want to land the island, and this kind of conflict, I think China will probably be use tougher measures against any Japanese reaction. So those are the only things that China can do. But at the same time, I think China will be very cautious, not to damage the bilateral relationship.
Okay, how much of this has to do with politics? Does this nationalistic stand have something to do with the upcoming transition of leadership in China?
Well, certainly the leadership in China, in Beijing, they have to realize that if you put too much pressure on the protesters in China, it will backfire. People will again say things to criticize the government and say the Chinese government has been too weak, etc., etc. But at the same time, they also realize it's a double-edged sword. You have to contain this nationalism to some extent. So it's really a balance that they have to strike.
And Dr. Lee Ming-jung, they're joining me. He's the Associate Professor with the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Coming up next on Primetime Asia.
The female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down.
A Republican politician causes an uproar after suggesting that pregnancy from rape is rare. And this woman is on her way to make history, aiming to be South Korea's first female president. Does she have what it takes?
Singaporeans aren't having enough babies, and we stand to face enormous problems because of that. A long-standing problem that's now sparking a fresh debate. New suggestions include removing the primary school leaving examinations, accepting single parenthood, and even lucky draws. How can Singaporeans be persuaded to have more children? Baby woes on Talking Point The Vote, live Tuesday, 8 p.m.
Tokyo Marine Life Insurance Singapore. Your security, our priority.
here in Speak Up. Get the inside scoop on our guests or take part in the Twitter session in conversation with Unplugged. Anytime, anywhere on channelnewsasia.com/TV shows.
Devastating floods. The worst blackout in world history. And massive traffic gridlock. Asian cities are buckling under the strain of rapid economic growth and extreme weather conditions. Can these cities continue to fulfill the needs of a growing urban population? Urban disasters on Inside Thursday at 8 p.m.
And we're back on Primetime Asia this Monday. The daughter of an assassinated South Korean leader has officially won her party's backing to run for president. Park Geun-hye will become South Korea's first female president if she wins December's election. The ruling New Frontier Party overwhelmingly chose Ms. Park over 4 male challengers. The daughter of former South Korean leader Park Chung-hee. She has promised to secure the presidency and create a country full of dreams and hope. The 60-year-old also pledged to eradicate corruption and safeguard the nation against external threats. Ms. Park narrowly lost out in the party's 2007 primary to President Lee Myung-bak. South Korean presidents are only allowed to serve a single 5-year term. And for more on this development, Channel News Asia's Korea Bureau Chief Lim Yun-suk joining us in Seoul tonight. Yun-suk, so what are Park Geun-hye's chances for December's election?
Well, the opposition, the main opposition party has nominated who should be running against in the December presidential elections. But recent polls have shown her way ahead of the other liberal opponents. And so I think right now she has a very good chance of becoming the next president, which would make her the first female president ever of South Korea.
Yun-suk, Ms. Park comes from, of course, a political family with privileged upbringing. So how will this, do you think, affect or shape her campaign?
Presidential election. Now, father seized power in a military coup in 1961, and he ruled South Korea with an iron fist. And so a lot of Koreans who fought for democracy and remember the harsh times under his rule. There are a lot of Koreans, especially older Koreans, who praise him for his rapid economic growth, the way that he carried out the development of South Korea, and give him credit for making South Korea what it is today. And so I think it is going to be very mixed, the fact that her father is Park Chung-hee. But, a lot of Koreans that I spoke to recently who support Ms. Park says that, they want to give her a chance. Because a lot of Koreans remember her as someone who
All right, we're not getting a clear signal from you, Yun-suk. Your audio is cracking up. We'll try to get back to you again later. Channel News Asia's Lim Yun-suk there in Seoul with us. Let's have a look at other stories also making news tonight. Parts of Europe experiencing some of the hottest temperatures of the year. In Paris, tourists and locals sought refuge in the Trocadero fountain, just a few steps away from the Eiffel Tower. The mercury touching 36 degrees Celsius on Sunday there. It was even hotter in parts of Germany, temperatures reaching up to 40 degrees Celsius. But many people took advantage of the sunny weather to take part in outdoor activities. The high temperatures are the result of a high-pressure system bringing hot air from Africa to Europe.
From what I understand from doctors, that's really rare. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down.
Well, that comment about legitimate rape triggered a firestorm of criticism in the United States. Republican senatorial candidate Todd Akin suggested it is rare for women to become pregnant from being raped. He was trying to explain his complete opposition to abortions. Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney distancing himself from Mr. Akin's comments. But Mr. Akin later admitted that he misspoke in that interview. And it's time for business news. Leslie Tang is joining us from Hong Kong. Leslie, you have some gloomy numbers from Taiwan?
That's right, Tim. Taiwan's export orders have fallen for the 5th consecutive month in July. Export orders fell by a worse than expected 4.4% on year, hurt by sluggish demand in key markets like China and Europe. This follows the 2.6% fall in June. Today's numbers add to doubts about an imminent turnaround in global demand for Asian goods. Export orders are an indicator of shipments 1 to 2 months ahead, and Taiwan's numbers are seen as a gauge of the strength of Asian exports and of global tech demand. And to more positive economic figures out today, Thailand's economy has posted stronger than expected growth in the second quarter. This due to strong domestic demand, private investment, and high tourist numbers. GDP grew by 3.3% from the previous 3 months. When compared to the same period a year ago, growth came in at 4.2%. The Thai economy is showing a sharp rebound after suffering a contraction following the massive floods last year. With today's numbers, analysts say they expect the central bank to keep interest rates unchanged at 3% for now. For the whole year, however, the government has trimmed its growth forecast to between 5.5 and 6%. It was a quiet trading day in Asia with markets in India, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines closed for holiday. Elsewhere across the region, markets took a breather following recent gains. Channel News Asia's Yvonne Chan has the market wrap. Yvonne?
That's right. Most Asian markets closed lower today with profit-taking after recent gains. In Japan, the Nikkei managed to close just above water, with a weaker yen giving exporters a boost. Honda Motor advanced 0.9% to a 6-week high, while Nikon climbed 0.5%. But the Shanghai Composite slid 1% amid reports that China would take steps to curb housing inflation. Data over the weekend showed that home prices in China rose in July for a second month. Some profit-taking in the property sector as well. Gemdale and Polyrail Estate both shedding more than 3%. Over in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng Index falling 0.4% ahead of a slew of corporate earnings out later this week. China Mobile closed in the red following the release of a poor set of interim results, while Tencent fell 1.5% as investors locked in gains. In other markets, Australia's S&P ASX 200 dropped by 0.1%, led by losses in the banking and telco sectors, while the Kospi was weighed down by Samsung Electronics, which fell 1.2%. The tech giant was sold by foreign investors ahead of a U.S. court ruling on its legal battle with Apple. Meanwhile, the TAIEX pared back earlier gains, finally closing 0.5% lower, with tech stocks among the losers. And in Thailand, the SET also closed in the negative, with profit-taking in energy and banking counters. Markets in Singapore and India will resume trading on Tuesday. And that's a wrap of your Asian markets for today. Back to you.
Channel News Asia's Yvonne Chan. Now, Taiwanese smartphone maker HTC is writing off another of its investments. The company says it expects to book an investment loss of $40 million for its stake in the US-based gaming company OnLive. OnLive has run into serious financial trouble and applied for asset restructuring over the weekend. Just last month, HTC suffered a loss of nearly $5 million when it sold back half of its 50.1% stake in headphone maker Beats Electronics. Today's announcement is raising questions about HTC's $700 million buying spree over the past 2 years. Some market watchers say HTC could soon relook its investment in computer graphics company S3 Graphics. S3 has lost a number of patent suits against Apple. Earnings from top Chinese instant noodle maker Tingyi Holdings for the first half of the year, net income came in at $284 million. That's up by 24% compared to the same period a year ago, but it's below market forecasts. And if you strip out the first quarter earnings, net income for Q2 amounted to $86 million. This is a drop of 18% on year. The numbers suggest that China's slowing growth is taking a bite out of basic consumer staples. Still, shares of Hong Kong-listed Tingyi hit a 3-month high today. On optimism, cost controls will improve margins for the rest of the year. Over to IPO news. Reports say a company linked to Hong Kong tycoon Li Ka-shing is looking to raise about $1 billion through an initial public offering in Malaysia. Westports Malaysia operates one of Asia's busiest shipping terminals at Port Klang on the west coast of Malaysia. Hutchison Port Holdings, which is controlled by Mr. Lee, has a 31.5% stake in the company. According to sources close to the deal, Westports has invited banks to pitch for the IPO. A listing is expected to take place towards the end of this year or early next year. And that's your business update. Back to you, Tim.
All right, thank you very much for that, Leslie Tang there live with us in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, the Asian Development Bank now says Myanmar could become a middle-income nation by 2030. In a report released today, the ADB estimates that Myanmar is likely to post a solid GDP growth of 7 to 8% for a decade or more. The multilateral lender noted that Myanmar's rich natural resources and strategic location between economic giants China and India can help it become one of Asia's rising stars. But the ADB cautioned, in order to realize its potential, Myanmar needs to continue on its road to reform. Well, Myanmar is emerging from decades of military rule under a new civilian government that has been embracing wide-ranging reforms. And just today, it also announced an end to decades of media censorship. Local publications no longer have to get approval from the censors before they go to print. Previously, everything from newspapers to song lyrics and even fairy tales had to go through checks. Well, for more on developments in Myanmar, Channel News Asia's Indochina Bureau Chief Anasuya Sanyal is joining us from Bangkok. Anasuya, let's start with this assessment of Myanmar's economy. What are some of the challenges in achieving progress?
Good evening, Tim. Well, the first challenge is the lack of a coherent monetary policy governed by an independently functioning central bank. The government also has a huge public debt, and they lack enough investment or tax revenue to really mobilize funds. In terms of tax revenue against percentage of GDP, Myanmar lags even behind Afghanistan and Asia. And also part of this political reform, it's really got to touch all citizens of Myanmar, not just the ethnic majorities and the people in the urban areas.
Absolutely important, and underlying all of this is that this growth needs to be inclusive. It needs to reach everybody from the middle class to the very poor. It needs to be environmentally sustainable, and this is a specific challenge for Myanmar given its large natural resource base.
The ADB has stressed that the government's role is crucial in these economic reforms. They say the government needs to limit its ownership and control of many industries to help bolster confidence and drum up investment. Tim?
Anasuya, what's the reaction been like to lifting the censorship we were talking about? Just how wide-ranging are the changes?
They're pretty wide-ranging for the print media. Not everything has been affected. No mention of television, radio, or online media. But what this means is that print journalists no longer have to submit their articles ahead of time and have censors take out what they deem is inappropriate. Now, the reactions have ranged from elation on the part of the journalists who are becoming more used to and adjusting to their new freedoms, to skepticism on part of the critics who say they will believe these changes when they see it. Tim?
All right, Anasuya, thank you very much for that. Anasuya Sanyal there live with us from Bangkok. Still ahead on Primetime Asia, a state of confusion remains among migrants who fled northeastern India in recent days. Why has it been so difficult to put to rest rumors and threats of attacks against them? And a former soldier turned businessman and politician. Indonesian presidential candidate Prabowo Subianto speaks of how he has changed and how he intends to serve the country.
If, as British Prime Minister Harold Wilson claimed, a week is a long time in politics, then Prabowo Subianto is really pushing the upper limits of that supposition. Tipped by many as a possible future president of Indonesia, the soldier-turned-politician seems to have begun his campaign in earnest. Tough military man or consensus-building politician? Judge for yourself. The interview with Prabowo Subianto, tonight at 8:30, exclusively on Channel News Asia.
on AM Live, big men, big guns and big explosions. The Expendables are back on another mayhem-filled mission. Get our review on Zoom In.
I wouldn't say, honestly, that I'm such a good person and I just make these good choices.
Supermodel turned mogul Tyra Banks defines what it means to be a good role model. Don't miss part 1 of our interview. Humanity at its best and worst. Magnum photographer Ian Berry has captured it all. We'll meet the man tomorrow on AM Live.
While waiting for the president, suddenly the sky opened up, followed by strong wind.
The rain became heavier and heavier. But on the stage, nobody moved.
We just want to show the world that although we are a small nation,
no matter what, we can overcome.
Understand one of Singapore's most memorable National Day celebrations, the day it rained on our parade, Friday 8 p.m. on Channel News Asia.
The Day It Rained on Our Parade is supported by the Ministry of Information, Communication and the Arts. The world never gets tired of capturing winning moments.
But guess what? Winning isn't everything.
Sometimes it's the dramatic comebacks, the unlikely gestures, the strong finishes, and the graceful exits.
Join me for all the best sporting moments.
We're back on the second half of Primetime Asia on a Monday night. Here are some of the stories happening this Monday. Myanmar announcing the lifting of censorship of all its local publications. It is the latest reform of the media under President Thein Sein's government. As of today, reporters will no longer have to submit their work to state censors before publication. Films, though, will still be subject to censorship. A Chinese court handed Gu Kailai, that's the wife of disgraced Chinese politician Bo Xilai, a suspended death sentence for murdering a British man. So this means she's likely to face life in jail. Well, Gu says the verdict is just and it reflects a special respect towards the law, reality, and life. The court also sentenced her aide, Zhang Yaojun, to 9 years in jail for acting as an accomplice. 4 Chinese police officers have been convicted for trying to cover up Mr. Haywood's murder. They were handed jail sentences of between 5 and 11 years. Well, China's trial of the century is closed with the suspended death sentence for Gu Kailai. But while the trial has ended, questions still remain about exactly what the verdict and the sentence mean for Gu, her husband, and for China in general. For more on this now, joining me in the studio is Benjamin Ho. He is an Associate Research Fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. And thanks for your time, Benjamin, tonight. So exactly what does the suspended sentence mean for Gu Kailai?
Well, I think for Gu Kailai, basically it would demonstrate, number one, that the Chinese Communist Party is indeed taking action. But however, it has to mitigate the kind of penalty, the kind of punishment that is being meted out with the influence of Bo Xilai. So on this, I suppose it's going to be moving forward. You would see there could be a possibility of tension surfacing, especially among people who feel that the sentence is, as compared to a death sentence, it's too lenient, and those who feel that, okay, this is the Communist Party, it's trying to send a message, it's making some kind of a stand. So I think moving on, you would see some of these tensions being played out.
All right, specifically what kind of message is the government sending the public?
I think the government, what it wants to do is to highlight that ultimately the party centrality remains crucial to China's leadership transition, and it will not entertain any challenge or any confrontation to that kind of party centrality. Having said so, I think it also highlights the extent to which China is prepared to sort of stake some of its legal reforms, especially against some of its politicians who may have seemed to be having a position that sort of challenges this party centrality. So in a sense, you could see some kind of message being sent out by the party to the rest of the Communist Party rank and file.
And the public. But with a foreign national involved in this one, I understand some British High Commissioner officials were also allowed to attend the trial. What sort of message is China sending out to the rest of the world?
Well, I think in terms of its foreign policy, I do not think that it's going to be affected very much. But the key question, however, would be China would not entertain any external interference into its domestic politics. So I think on that note, we're pretty clear that Chinese domestic politics remains Beijing's own purview. However, I suppose justice needs to be meted out and need to be seen to be meted out. And on that note, you could argue that it is the fact that Gu Kailai was being sentenced suggests that yes, the Chinese the Communist Party recognizes this offense, serious offense, and it is sending out this message that it will be punished.
All right, Bo Xilai, the husband of Gu Kailai, of course, is a very popular figure in Chongqing, and he has a lot of supporters there. So do you think the sentencing today has an influence on this?
Well, probably to the man on the street, it may not be. In fact, news, it's pretty much muted over there. So men on the street probably may not care about what happens. But we're seeing a lot of comments on social media, for instance. Within a couple of hours, there have been more than 2 million comments on social media, Chinese social media, highlighting, discussing about this. And to what extent social media intrudes and even influences domestic politics and the nature of its political transition would be something that would be very interesting to keep a watch out for.
All right. In politics, though, how do you think this will affect the leadership transition?
Well, it's really anybody's guess, but my view, at least, it's that most of the structures, the people, the politicians that are in place have already been decided. So while you could argue that Bo Xilai was supposed to be one of the members of the Politburo, and this case is surely an unnecessary interference into the smoothness of its political transition. However, I believe that the Chinese Communist Party does have its own plans, and I think this closure of the case would, I suppose, would mark a closure into this entire political transition and how it's moving forward.
So it's moving ahead without Bo Xilai?
I should think so.
All right, thank you very much, Benjamin. Benjamin Ho there, an Associate Research Fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Over in India, almost 50,000 people from the northeastern or with northeastern origins have been displaced in the past 10 days by a fear of mob attacks. They have been fleeing back to their homes in the northeast in such numbers that the media has been referring to it as nothing less than an exodus. Channel News Asia's Smita Prakash takes up this story.
The relief camps set up in the state of Assam are overcrowded and teeming with people who have recently fled from different parts of the country. They came here because they heard rumors that they'd be attacked by mobs belonging to another religion, or because they received text messages with reportedly doctored images of massacred villagers. And it was only after they returned home that they realized nothing was quite as it seemed. A state of confusion has been added to the initial fear as the returnees are now unsure whether they should return to their jobs they hurriedly left.
बुड्ढा माँ बाबा है और सभी बोला रहा है जब तुम जल्दी से जल्द आ जाओ हैं पूरा जब पूरा ठीक हो जाएगा शांति आ जाएगा देश में और रिटर्न आ जाओ काम करो कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है यही सब.
The Indian government has blamed unidentified groups in Pakistan for uploading images of what appear to be massacres of Muslims in Myanmar and Thailand and passing it off as northeast India.
The bulk of these have been uploaded in various websites in Pakistan. Now that shows the thing. 74 such websites have been blocked already. 34 more have been identified by one of the agencies. Those 34 will also be blocked.
Pakistan has denied any role in the matter. The Indian government, meanwhile, has banned bulk text messaging to stop the spread of disinformation. Meanwhile, in Assam, the state where ethnic violence last month led to the loss of life and property, over 17,000 policemen have been deployed to maintain peace beside several columns of paramilitary and army personnel. In the camps, the numbers are swelling. They have no identity documents and no money. It is fast becoming a huge humanitarian crisis for the local and central government. The problem is confounding because it works at so many different levels. There is the tribal Muslim conflict at one level. This region borders Bangladesh, so there is an international element involved. Then there is the dynamics of regional politics also involved. But today the biggest crisis is that thousands of people are living in terrible conditions in relief camps and they need to be rehabilitated. Smita Prakash for Channel News Asia in New Delhi.
Well, there are still 2 years to go until Indonesia holds its presidential elections, but one contender appears to have already begun campaigning. Former Special Forces Commander Prabowo Subianto appears to have left his dark military past and transformed himself into a businessman and politician. And if the polls have got it right, he may be the favorite candidate to assume Indonesia's highest office in the 2014 election. But can his transformation really be believed? Channel News Asia's Sabrina Chua sat down with a man to find out.
Soldier, businessman, politician. Prabowo Subianto has worn many uniforms. But underneath it all, Mr. Prabowo says he's simply
a loyal son of Indonesia.
He served his country for 24 years in the military, and many still remember the killings, kidnappings and torture then Lieutenant General Prabowo was accused of.
It's an open secret that some people fear you, and you perhaps still have this image of a hard military man. Is that image justified?
I don't think so, but if I were in active service, yeah, I have to be a good military man. But of course, you know, you are what you are. I think I did make enemies in my career. You know, I was a no-nonsense guy, mission-oriented. You know, I was a combat officer, you know. Once you've been in combat, you don't really think too much about ceremonies and niceties, and so I think on that case I was a bit too abrasive. But I think now, you know, I am older. I think a bit wiser, I hope. But in the end, I think it's what you stand for. It's the principles you stand for that matters, I think. And I think this is coming across that that in the end I'm a good servant of my people, and if they need me, I will serve.
Mr. Prabowo has declared the 2014 presidential election as his last battle.
This is my age. How can, you know, if you're not needed, you must know when to step aside.
But if he's given the chance to lead, he wants to transform Indonesia.
I want to lay the foundation, the groundwork for the transformation of the Indonesian economy so that we can be a stable, modern, advanced, industrial, and just society. That is my ambition. That is my driving motivation.
The question is, will Indonesians accept and believe in his transformation and give him that chance? Sabrina Chua, Channel News Asia, Singapore.
Well, you can get a deeper insight into Prabowo Subianto and his plans for Indonesia on the interview that is on tonight at the Times, flashing on your screens right now. Still ahead on Primetime Asia, Hollywood director Tony Scott dies in an apparent suicide. We will tell you what witnesses saw. And Chinese tennis star Li Na fights back to win the Cincinnati Open. Hear what she has to say about overcoming the challenge.
One of the old motto, it was our customer, our master. To think local, to think global and local at the same time. Bata has been a pioneer.
Companies that have survived a century and more. Their secrets, struggles, and successes. The Centennials, tonight at 8 p.m. exclusively on Channel News Asia.
It's not about winning or losing. It's about showing up. Showing up to meet your challenge, to face yourself.
And Adam Scott with 141 yards left uphill.
The harder you try,
picking up speed toward the hole.
the nearer the miss, the greater the lesson learned.
And being an impossible two-putt.
Pushing you to show up.
To an eagle two.
To seek perfection, over and over again.
For Adam Scott at the 7th.
Here at Talking Point The Vote, we don't want to do all the talking, we want to hear from you. Share your views on our Facebook page. Like us. Join our debate on Twitter. Make a stand by casting your vote. Or give us a call during the show. Watch our live stream anywhere. Talk to us here on Talking Point The Vote every Tuesday live at 8 p.m.
Markets in free fall with Europe on the brink of a recession. Indonesia's man in charge of trade talks about how Asia will be affected.
That will put a dent on growth. But the good news is that investments have been going up quite nicely.
Our Eurozone, a crisis of capitalism or a crisis of leadership?
Tackling the financial slump. 3-part special on Conversation with, Wednesday 8 p.m.
Well, in Singapore, marriage agencies and non-government organizations welcoming the move to criminalize sham marriages or marriages of convenience, saying it is a step in the right direction. But concerns remain over how such cases are being investigated so that genuine marriages are not persecuted. There are also calls for matchmaking agencies which bring in foreign brides to be regulated. Channel News Asia's Imelda Saad with this report.
Singapore's reputation has made it an attractive destination for some seeking a better life out of their home country. A check with marriage agencies here show it's quite common for foreign wives to ask about marrying Singaporean men. Sometimes the reasons are dubious.
They intended to say find maybe a job in Singapore doing those illegal work. When you become a Singapore citizen, you hold a Singapore passport, you can go to anywhere very easily.
In his 8 years in the business, Mr. Loy said he encountered 6 cases of runaway wives.
Now, there isn't a professional body or association that prescribes a code of conduct or minimum standards for these agencies to meet, so monitoring what they do and how they operate becomes a relatively grey area.
The very least that could be done is for these agencies to be accredited by the government, and for them to undergo training courses and, to be licensed.
There were 12 sham marriages uncovered in the first half of this year, compared to just 4 or 5 over the past 5 years. The Immigration and Checkpoints Authority, or ICA, told Channel News Asia that while the figure is still small, the government wants to act early and decisively against such marriages. Women's advocacy group Aware, though, has concerns about how the law will be applied. It wants authorities to make a clear distinction between sham marriages and those often perceived as one but may be genuine. These often involve low-income foreign brides and low-income Singaporean men.
And these people are left in limbo. They have uncertain immigration status. Now that there's a clearer check and balance on identifying what sham marriages are, it should be easier, therefore, for them to identify which are the legitimate marriages, and for these foreign wives married to these low-income Singaporean men to get their long-term visit passes and PR.
There's also the issue of Singapore's cultural context when it comes to gratifications exchanged in marriages. For example, the exchange of dowries. The ICA said it's mindful of the diverse cultural practices and the highly personal nature of marriages. For operational reasons, it did not want to reveal its investigation process, only to say that it will conduct detailed background assessments before taking action. Imelda Saad, Channel News Asia, Singapore.
All right, time for a look at what other stories are making news on a Monday. Hollywood director Tony Scott died after jumping from a bridge in Los Angeles. Police found a suicide note in his car. The 68-year-old British director of blockbusters like Top Gun and Crimson Tide was seen climbing over a fence on the bridge at about 12:30 p.m. local time. His body was recovered from the murky water several hours later. Tony is the youngest brother of fellow movie director Ridley Scott. Twitter tributes are pouring in from celebrities and his Hollywood colleagues. And this is a Rubbish Bin World Cup that's taking place on the streets of a town in western Germany. Braving the summer heat, spectators lining up to watch some 60 drivers from Germany, Belgium, Austria, and Luxembourg on this race. Organizers said the race came about when someone laid himself on a rubbish bin at a Formula One racetrack, and the idea just kind of took off from there. So now you might not think it would be easy to race on these bins, but the winner of this year's race shared a tip. Just keep the feet and parts of the bin off the ground so that only the wheels roll freely. And now on to some real sporting action in English football. Manchester City launched their Premier League campaign the same way they finished off last season, by battling back in a dramatic victory. The champions beat Southampton 3-2 thanks to Samir Nasri's late winner at Eastlands. City found themselves trailing 2-1 after the 68th minute. That sparked a frantic finale with Eden Dzeko equalizing with 18 minutes remaining before Nasri struck 10 minutes from time. But the win came at a cost for City. Sergio Aguero suffered a knee injury just 8 minutes into the opening match. And despite his insistence that it's no significant injury, manager Roberto Mancini is worried that he could be without his star striker.
Usually the knee is always dangerous, and his injury maybe was so strange. I'm worried. I'm worried in this moment.
I think it's ligaments.
We don't know.
Chelsea got off to a solid start with a 2-0 away win at Wigan. Eden Hazard, making his debut for Chelsea, played a crucial part in both goals. He set up Branislav Ivanovic's early opener and then won a penalty, which was converted by Frank Lampard. In tennis, after losing 3 finals this season, China's Li Na has finally won her first title after beating Germany's Angelique Kerber at the Cincinnati Open.
I know if I lose this final, maybe next time if I come to final again, I was feeling, hey, you lose 4 times already. How you can win a match in the final? Yeah, I think it was giving me a lot of confidence, you know.
And Li's tenacity showed as she came from a set down to beat Kerber in the final. The 9th seed overcame the German 1-6, 6-3, 6-1 for her first WTA title since winning the 2011 French Open. But Li turned the game on its head by breaking her opponent's serve at will to dominate proceedings. The win will be a big boost for Li with the U.S. Open starting next Monday. And the Olympic celebrations continuing in Japan with its first ever victory parade in Tokyo's Ginza streets. The London Olympic Games was Japan's best showing at the Olympics after winning a record 38 medals. Japanese media reported that an estimated 500,000 people supporters had turned up to give them a hero's welcome. Organizers also hope the event will boost the city's bid to host the 2020 Summer Olympic Games. Well, Japan won 7 gold, 14 silver, and 17 bronze in London. And that's our report here on Primetime Asia for this Monday. Find out what's happening in our programs on facebook.com/Channel News Asia. Have a good evening.
Over the north of Beijing, as the visibility drops, you'll still see things with perfect clarity. A crowd filled the ballroom for Digesting the Facts, a sold-out health seminar on colorectal health. With colorectal health problems on the rise in Singapore, participants gained timely information from experts who